So good evening, everyone. It's really nice to see so many faces that I know and from photographers, from curators, people within the industry. And it's a real pleasure to see you here. And hopefully this evening will bring something new to you and you'll learn more about Andor Kraszna-Krausz. I'd like to start this evening and open by thanking the Kraszna-Krausz Foundation, particularly Alex Anthony, who's in the room somewhere, the Foundation's administrator, and Sir Brian Pomeroy, who we've heard from, its chair, for the invitation to speak, and to the Liszt Institute, the Hungarian Cultural Centre, for hosting this event. Last year, at the Foundation's request, I was commissioned to undertake research into its history and that of its founder, Andor Kraszna-Krausz. And this evening, I'm going to focus on KK, as Kraszna-Krausz was often known, and Focal Press, the publishing house he established in London. That said, it would be remiss not to remember the important work, as Brian's just outlined, that the Foundation undertakes each year, inviting a distinguished panel to review and recognise some of the best international photography and moving image publications. I'd also like to acknowledge the Foundation's former administrator, Andrea Livingstone, who I think is in the room somewhere as well. Andrea, has been a really important source of information from her work with the Foundation over many years and preserved some of its early records alongside her own recollections. And just last week, she provided me some really great pictures, and this is one of KK, which I've just managed to add to the slides that you'll see this evening. So I'm going to divide this talk into three parts: KK the man, Focal Press, and just end by reviewing his significance and make some suggestions for the future of his archive. So, if you were an amateur photographer between the 1950s and 1990s, or studying photography at college or university from the 1950s, or were working professionally within the photographic industry, then it was very likely that you had a Focal Press book given to you as a present, or you purchased a Focal book to support your interest. When I first got interested in photography, it was W.D. Emanuel's all-in-one camera book that I bought, along with a number of other Focal titles, as my interest in photography grew. Focal Press was pretty much part of every photographer's life, and its founder, Andor Kraszna-Krausz, and his authors explained how to use your camera, how to make photographs, and explored photography's history and provided authoritative text on the science of photography, amongst a myriad of other photographic subjects. By all accounts, though, KK was a private man, and this was reflected in the limited contemporary accounts of his personal life and career. His papers, library, and records from Focal Press were deposited with the National Museum of Photography, Film and Television, now the National Science and Media Museum in Bradford. And Alex and I were fortunate to be able to spend a day looking through some of KK's personal effects in Bradford, and a day looking at some of his library stored at Rawton, which is the Science Museum store near Swindon. So who was Andor Kraszna-Krausz? KK was born to Adolf and Irene Krausz on 12th of January 1904 in Szombathely in Hungary. His family was Jewish, but this was lightly worn, and although Andor attended Hebrew classes and retained an interest in his Jewish heritage throughout his life, he converted to Catholicism in the early 1920s. Little is known of his early education and family life, other than that he attended the Szombathely Catholic school, and by the time he was 12 years old, he had a talent for photography. The museum director, Colin Ford, relates a story told to him by KK that in pre-war Hungary, every boy was given a camera for his 11th or 12th birthday, or in the case of Jewish boys, at their bar mitzvah. At some point between 1923 and 1925, KK added Kraszna to his name, and he used Kraszna-Krausz for the remainder of his life. KK studied law at the University of Budapest before moving to Germany in the early 1920s. There he enrolled in the Department of Theatre Studies and Cinema Technology at the Technical Institute in Munich, studying photography and cinematography under Konrad Wolter. After completing his studies, KK moved to Berlin, contributing film and book reviews, interviews and commentaries to film magazines, and beginning his publishing career, which would occupy the rest of his working life. He joined the publishing house of Wilhelm Knapp of Halle, which had established a new film magazine, Filmtechnik, Filmkunst, usually referred to as Die Filmtechnik. The new publication initially focused on film technology, publishing articles that were practical, aimed at people working in the film industry, as well as people from other areas such as teachers and businessmen who needed to use film in their jobs. KK was initially taken on as an intern at the magazine's outset, but was quickly appointed senior film critic by September 1925, and in January 1926, he replaced Ernst Erwin Haberkorn as chief editor. He would oversee every bi-weekly issue until the summer of 1936. KK's writing style was, quote, precise, to the point, and trenchant. His work ethic was described by Elfriede Brüning, who worked for a time as a secretary, as extremely disciplined, energetic, and a film lover who knew neither work hours nor weekends. These would remain hallmarks of his career. As Reinhardt notes, quote, between 1925 and 1928, no other author wrote nearly as many editorials and film and book reviews for Die Filmtechnik, and during the time he was working for Knapp, nobody else initiated and edited more film-related publications for the publishing house. KK's position provided him with a platform to propagate his own views on film from a perspective that was removed from that of a filmmaker. He set out a personal manifesto in an issue of Die Filmtechnik, making the case for mandatory film education for young people as a means of raising artistic film production in Germany to a new level. Along with a number of his colleagues, KK also brought left-leaning views to the magazine, which informed his writing. Away from Die Filmtechnik, he became involved in the leftist film movement and accepted the role of monitoring the People's Committee for Fine Art, an association founded in 1928 by communist and other left-wing groups. The Volksverband, as it was intended to promote film as a medium of criticism, to counteract reactionary films and to combat censorship. KK was on the organization's artistic committee. KK also had access to international media. In 1927, he was appointed as Berlin correspondent to the influential if short-lived journal Close Up. The journal described him as the eminent editor of Germany's most interesting film journal, with a reputation for, quote, being one of the few really good critics of modern cinema. It foresaw his monthly articles of being of great value and interest. And these links provided an opportunity beyond Germany for KK to promote his own magazine. And as Reinhardt again notes, in less than 2 years, a formerly sedate specialist journal had evolved into a dynamic and internationally recognized modern platform that was not afraid to show its ideological and political orientation. KK's relationship with the Filmtechnik changed around 1929. The reasons are hard to determine, but there doesn't appear to have been any disagreement with Wilhelm Knapp, the publishers, and Filmtechnik did not respond to Germany's political upheavals until 1931. KK began to supervise more film-related books for Knapp. A new serial book publication, Books for the Cinema Projectionist, was produced from 1929 under KK's editorial control, in part a response to the coming of sound to cinema. He was also involved with the founding of the DACO in January 1929. This was a trade union for German film artists and workers, representing their interests in the face of increasingly dominant media conglomerates in the country. Die Filmtechnik became the official organ of the organization. KK was also editing Film for Halle, a magazine published by Knapp for amateur cine enthusiasts from 1927. The magazine was advertised in Close Up in 1927 as the first monthly publication in Europe devoted to the problems of amateur cinematography. A new book, Crank, a textbook on amateur filmmaking, edited by KK, was published in March 1929. As a textbook, it was unusual in adopting an informal approach to its text, and it was an approach that KK was to develop further with the Filmbücher für alle series and later with Focal Press. The series was edited by KK and appeared from 1931 with the first by Max Tiesler, small film alles Schulfilm, narrow gauge film, school film. It featured a stylish cover design by graphic artist Lothar Monkelfen, which was used across several titles with just the number and author and title changing. The first 6 titles were all edited by KK. Alex Strasser's Filmentwurf, Filmregie, Filmschnitt, part of the Filmbücher für alle series, was reviewed in Close Up. It presaged KK's future publishing career, noting that, quote, "What is admirable in the book is that, like the others in this series, it does not explain things theoretically, but illustrates them with many instructive examples." And Alex Strasser was to work with KK on several focal titles, as we'll see in a few minutes. KK seems to have carried on with the editing of amateur film magazine and books for NAP, but in late 1936 or 1937, still haven't quite pinned down when he left Germany and arrived in Britain. His last issue of Film Technic appeared in the summer of 1936, and it seems likely that he stopped work on Film for alle around about the same time. The reasons for his departure are unclear, but it seems reasonable to assume that his Hungarian origins, perhaps his Jewish ancestry, communist or at least left-wing sympathies were increasingly suspect in the face of the rise of Nazism and growing tensions in Europe. These most likely suggested to him that it was time to leave for somewhere more secure. KK was one of many émigrés from Hungary and Germany involved in photography and publishing who settled in Britain and the United States. He and his wife Irma became naturalized British citizens in 1949. Together they purchased Old Thatch, a house away from London on the River Thames at Bourne End. The house had previously been owned by children's author Enid Blyton, and it remained KK's home until his death. He filled it with period furniture, antiques and a library, and the garage housed at different times a Jaguar and then a Rolls Royce, although his driving was described as erratic. John Chittock, who worked for KK and later chaired the foundation, noted that despite his apparent shyness, KK, quote, had some of the qualities of the extrovert. He was persuasive, articulate, and possessed unexpected flashes of dry humour. He had, quote, other remarkable qualities which underpinned his brilliance as a publisher, not least those of a well-read aesthete. He was a chess player and owned several dogs, and KK's will noted that in the event of the foundation being wound up, then the remaining funds were to benefit mainly animal charities. With his stepping back from control of Focal Press in 1978 and Irma's death from cancer in 1982, KK seems to have lost a sense of purpose. Although he continued to lunch at fashionable restaurants in London, he was essentially a private man. His friend Bert Kepler, the American photo magazine editor and writer, recalled that KK was often lonely in his latter days. KK's contribution to publishing received long overdue recognition with the DGPH Culture Award in 1979 and was recognised with an honorary doctorate from the University of Bradford in 1989, and honorary fellowships from the Royal Photographic Society in 1984 and the British Kinematograph, Sound and Television Society. With no close family except for a niece, in 1985, KK set up the Kraszna-Krausz Foundation with the aim of providing an annual award for the best books on photography and moving image and grants to support research projects. The foundation was the recipient of the majority of his estate. He donated his books on photography and his own copies of Focal Press publications, numbering several thousand volumes, to the National Museum of Photography, Film and Television, which named a room in its research centre after him. And after his death, his personal archive was also donated to the museum as we're here. KK died on the 24th of December 1989, aged 85 years. His estate had a net value of just over £1 million. And other than a few bequests to his niece and to those who had helped him support him in his final years, it was all left to the foundation that bears his name. So on arriving in London, KK sought employment in a number of publishing houses without success, and eventually he set up his own, the Focal Press, in 1938. His new imprint was based in the London property he shared with Irma at 31 Fitzroy Square, and this was in addition to Old Thatch. And Focal Press remained under KK's editorial control until 1978. Based on KK's extensive experience from Germany, Focal Press quickly established an unrivaled reputation for its photography and cinematography books, benefiting from knowledgeable authors and KK's formidable editing skills. After the war, Focal benefited from a post-war boom in photography, especially from amateurs. And although many of its publications were aimed at amateurs, they also extended to professional practice, specialist photo science and technical books. And we have one of those authors in the room at the back there, Ralph. And subjects beyond photography and cinematography, although related areas including audio recording techniques, television, and early video technology. The word focal with the distinctive F logo was registered as a trademark in 1946 and remains in use today. A New York office, Focal Press Inc., was established in 1946, and in Britain, book trade distribution was initially handled by the Imperial Book Company Limited, with Sir Isaac Pitman and Sons Limited becoming Focal Press's main book trade distributor from the late 1940. Photographic companies also distributed Focal books directly to photographic retailers, and Pitman comes into our story in just a few minutes. Focal Press's first books made use of KK's connections with Knapp and authors he'd worked with in Germany. They were translated from German text by P.C. Smethurst, a doyen of photographic technology who would later become a focal author in his own right. Other translators included L. Andrew Mannheim, who again would become a focal author and had a long career as a respected photographic journalist. Mannheim, like KK, had arrived in Britain just pre-war and was encouraged by KK to take up writing. He would later describe KK as, quote, a hard taskmaster, but a perfectionist. Mannheim became a Focal Press technical author and was credited with playing a significant role in securing the imprint's technical authority. He was an editor for the monumental Focal Encyclopedia of Photography, which was first published in 1956 and went through numerous editions, and this is just the desk edition. He also wrote many of the focal guides and way books, including the Leica Way. Another key figure at Focal Press at this time was John Chittock. John joined in 1954 as his first job, eventually becoming a senior editor and was responsible for the Focal Encyclopedia. He left to go freelance and set up the magazine Screen Digest. Alan Blackwood recalls working for KK as his chief editor during the 1970s. He says that KK was an eccentric personality, as I recall, famous for sacking people. But for whatever reason, he liked and relied on me to handle his day-to-day affairs. And I think it was an unprecedented event in the annals of Focal Press when, having handed in my notice, he took me out for lunch. Alec Fry, who would later work on Practical Photographer and Amateur Photographer magazines, worked for KK from 1960 to 1962. His first job after national service, starting at £9 a week. KK introduced him to each department in turn, and eventually Fry ended up editing the monthly photo guide magazine published by Focal. Focal Press's success was immediate, based on publishing simple illustrated guides to many different aspects of photography, like those KK had been developing in Germany. Irrespective of the level the book was aimed at, texts were authoritative based on editorial standards that were exacting. Manuscripts were checked and rechecked by authorities on the subject, and accepted facts and dates were researched thoroughly and confirmed by KK and those he employed, and he was an expert in revising manuscripts from authors. Amongst the first wholly British books from Focal were a series of small photo guides by the photographer Edwin Smith, who produced illustrations for his own and other guides. The small guides and All About series were joined by more substantive books, such as Walter Nurnberg's Lighting for Photography, Means and Methods from 1940, which had reached its 16th edition by 1968. The all-in-one camera book by W.D. Emanuel, and initially with W.D. Dash, appeared in 1939, and a second edition followed in 1941. It had sold over 500,000 copies by 1962, and eventually it would go on to sell 1 million copies, going into more than 80 editions, including those in foreign languages, remaining in print until the early 1990s. In the early 1940s, KK began to publish large format picture books of 19th century photography as part of a history of photography in photograph series. These included work by the greats of 19th century photography, including William Henry Fox Talbot, David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson, through to Roger Fenton and Julia Margaret Cameron. They were selected from the permanent collection of the Royal Photographic Society by Alex Strasser, who had worked with KK in Germany, another emigre. And he had worked with KK on Knapp's Photo Rat series, a model for the Focal Press books. The accompanying essays, including those by KK, described the picture's relationships to the history of photography. And Strasser would go on to write other focal guides and books on cinematography for Focal Press. Between 1938 and 1945, around 140 titles were published, with the Photo Guide series priced at 1 shilling and sixpence. It is selling around 300,000 copies within 18 months. In 1944, KK edited Photography as a Career, Survey of the Present and Guide to the Future, which brought together Focal Press contributors and photographers such as Cecil Beaton and Howard Costa, Walter Nurnberg and Carl Hutton. As the British Journal of Photography noted, quote, "Once again, the Focal Press has set a standard that will not likely be overthrown." The war years had been surprisingly productive, but by 1944, the national paper shortage was causing delays for Focal in releasing titles, and the Bookseller magazine was noting 3 titles more than a year overdue. In late 1944, Focal took a page advertising a plain report to booksellers listing in its words, "New titles we know we shall publish, new titles we hope we can publish, reprints we know we shall publish, and reprints we hope we can publish, titles we have in stock," and it concluded with 2 titles gone for the duration. The delays continued into 1945 and then began to ease with the ending of hostilities. A new series, The Photo Job, was announced, which focused on the financial aspects of professional photography, with the first authored by Gordon Catling on wedding photography in 1945. Also announced was H. Young's A Plan for Film Studios, A Plea for Reform 1945, which returned to KK's first area of interest, films and filmmaking. The Focal Chart series was supplemented book production, and Focal claimed over 100,000 sold by 1946. In June 1947, Focal opened a gallery, and this was brand new to me during the research I undertook. So it opened a photography gallery at number 31 Fitzroy Square, where it was based. The first of a series of 10 one-man exhibitions, and sadly, I've not located any photographs of them at all, or the gallery space. So I'm showing 2 of Focal's significant photography art publications. So the exhibition program was initiated with the work of colour photographer H.I. Williams. The series, titled Photographs of the American Scene and People, concluded with Edward Weston in January 1949. And the British Journal of Photography noted, quote, "In arranging and presenting this remarkable series of entirely non-commercial exhibitions, the Focal Press has performed a very definite service to and to British photographers in general." And in May 1949, the gallery showed a memorial exhibition of Francis Bruguière's photography. So although the company was firmly rooted in book publishing, it also turned its attention to publishing 2 periodicals. The first was the monthly Photo Guide magazine from January 1950 to December 1964, and aimed at amateurs, as we saw earlier. It was edited by KK and for a period by Alec Fry, who we heard from, who had joined Focal as a trainee and progressed to a book editor before taking on that magazine. The other periodical was Perspective, quarterly review of progress, photography, cinematography, sound and image recording, edited by KK and published between 1959 and 1966. During the 1950s, the number of cinematography titles grew alongside related areas such as audio techniques and television. Reference works and photoscience works too were added. Key amongst these titles was the series Progress in Photography and the publications of Michael Langford. His Basic Photography from 1965 went through multiple editions and was Focal's best-selling title for many years and a student standard text. Focal also became the publisher of the Manual of Photography, which had its origins back to the Ilford Company in 1890. And one of Focal's specialities seems to have been producing series publications, which probably has been apparent to you from the slides I've shown. So by the time KK retired in 1978, Focal Press had published some 1,200 books in English and other languages on photography, cinematography and related areas, selling an unrivaled 50 million books to all levels of enthusiasts and professional. The later history of Focal Press was intertwined with wider consolidations and corporate changes within the publishing industry, which saw smaller imprints absorbed into larger corporations. And Focal Press was sold with KK in place in 1962 to Pitman Books, who'd been distributing to the book trade from 1940. It remained under KK's direction until 1978. And in turn, Pitman Books was taken over by Butterworths in 1981. And Focal's headquarters shifted from London to the United States, although a London office was maintained. The transfer involved the move of around 300 titles in photography, audio and visual communication to the new owner. Focal Press was then bought again, this time by Taylor & Francis in 2012 from Reed Elsevier, which had owned Butterworths. And today the Focal Press imprint sits within Routledge as part of a wider Informa group and describes itself as a leading publisher of media technology books. In reference back to its origins, which KK would recognise, the new company notes, quote, "We have resources for every stage of your career. Our books are filled with practical hands-on information to help you master your craft." So I wanted to just bring this talk to a conclusion by thinking a little bit about KK's legacy and the future of his archive. There is, of course, plenty more to say about KK, and I've only touched upon KK's pre-war life in Hungary and Germany, his writing and publishing activities there, his life in Britain, and of course the breadth and significance of Focal Press, as well as his legacy through the KK Foundation and his own archive. I started by saying that Focal Press was important in helping several generations of photographers, amateur and professional, learn their craft. If one looks down a list of names of Focal Press's authors, and you've heard a few this evening, and I know there are several in the audience tonight, it reads like a roll call of many of the most significant figures in post-war British photography: photographers, educators, scientists, and experts. Furthermore, KK and Focal have links with organisations such as the Royal Photographic Society, and KK in 1946 even stood unsuccessfully for election to the Society's council. He knew the teaching establishments, the photographic retailers, the photographic periodical press, and the photographic industry in Britain, Europe, and the United States. And this random page from his address book hints at that. At the top is Paul Popper, the Czech emigre, photographer who set up his own picture library. Picture Post obviously needs no introduction to this audience. The Photo Trade Bulletin was published for the trade. The PDA was the Photographic Dealers Association, and Lucia Maholi was a photographer, writer, and editor, and another emigre, and a key significant figure in her own right. A Miniature Camera magazine was a publication for amateurs. KK's archive is held within the National Science and Media Museum, And here are just a few items that Alex and I were able to see back in October. And these are some of the boxes that the archive rests in. This is KK caricatured by an unknown artist. And I think you can recognize him immediately from particularly the picture on the right-hand side. And the archive is full of telegrams and communications throughout the industry, as you would expect. It also includes lectures as well. So this is a lecture that he gave to the London College of Printing. And I think the paragraph that's just in the centre there, I think about talking about television, is perhaps something that still has relevance today. By far the strongest influence in spreading this visual impact is, needless to say, television. It floods adults and children alike with a continuous outpouring of pictures. The habit of having this unebbing flow of images around has become as much a part of daily life as chairs to sit on or shoes for our feet. Television sets are kept switched on just as the electric light is, even without somebody being in the room. And how much of that resonates? And he wrote about some of his own publishing activities when he was talking to the students. W.D. Emmanuel was one of those key authors, as we've heard. Edwin Smith, again, another important photographer whose work or archive sits within RIBA. And Jack Coote worked at Ilford and was an important historian of colour photography. His personal effects and the focal press library, which was originally intended to be kept distinct, is now, sadly, integrated with the museum's own library in Bradford. The focal press library and KK's personal library are held in the Science Museum Group's National Collections Centre at Rawton. Much of that material has not been looked at in detail since it was first acquired in 1990. And a few months ago, I spoke to Roger Taylor. The museum curator, Colin Ford, gave the go-ahead to visit KK's house after his death and to select and bring his personal archive into the museum in Bradford. Roger noted and said, quote, "It was the first big independent photography deposit for the museum. And Roger saved material as housekeepers were putting it on a bonfire in the garden, which Roger quickly put a stop to. After that, Roger went through KK's house, through every drawer, cupboard, and under KK's bed to locate everything that he thought would be of significance, including school records and material from Hungary. And the garage contained all the books that Focal Press had published. And Roger did say that the only thing he didn't save or couldn't save was a very, very large collection of books on roses and growing roses." So what next? This talk and a longer essay arose out of the KK's foundation to document its founder in history for its 40th anniversary year. At that time, access to the archive wasn't possible, so the research you've heard tonight and in the essay was based on mostly documentary sources. As such, there's certainly more that can be usefully done with the archive accessible once again. For example, KK was important in supporting photographers from post-war Germany and Hungary, and he deliberately commissioned and bought prints off them to give them an income. The archive includes work from Hungarian photographers Kertész and Brassai, including a dummy of the latter's Paris book. I'll just go back to this slide, actually, because this is the letter that Colin Ford wrote to KK in 1986, talking about the acquisition of the library and encouraging the donation. And then on the right, a press notice that was issued and some talking points around the acquisition. And Colin, I think, needs full credit for encouraging or asking Roger to go off and rescue as much of the material after KK's death. So it's important we recognise Colin this evening. So back to Brassai. So this is a dummy of the Brassai's Paris book. And as Roger noted during our conversation, quote, The library was focused, and this is the picture library, was focused on German and European photographers, many of which people hadn't heard of. And I believe, and Roger certainly believes, it's ripe for reappraisal. There are links between KK and another Hungarian photographer, Zoltán Glas, whose archive is also held by the Media Museum, and between KK and Hungarian filmmaker, photojournalist, and Stefan Laurent, who's best known for co-founding Lilliput and Picture Post magazines. I speak now in a personal capacity and not on behalf of the foundation, but it seems to me that the KK archive has been hidden for far too long since its acquisition. There is, I believe, an opportunity for academic research to look at the influence of KK and his influence on German photography and film publications, on KK and focal press and their impact on British photography, perhaps as a collaborative doctoral award between a museum and a university department. And there are university department reps in the audience here. The KK archive needs cataloguing for the first time, and there is need for a comprehensive bibliography of focal press's output. And of course, the picture library, as Roger Taylor noted to me, is, quote, visually very exciting. It too warrants detailed cataloguing and research on the photographers represented within it, their work, and how and where those images were used. This talk commemorates the Kraszna-Krausz Foundation's 40th anniversary, and I hope too it will act as a catalyst for new work, PhDs and papers exploring KK's archives in its many facets. It has at least highlighted the significance of Hungarian emigre Andor Kraszna-Krausz and his publishing activities, and I hope this evening's thrown a little light on the richness of his archive and KK as a person, and has reminded us that for several generations of photographers across the world, focal press taught them their photography. And again, my thanks to the Kraszna-Krausz Foundation, Brian and Alex, and the Liszt Institute this evening, and in particular Luca, and the AV support at the back of the room. Thank you for making this evening possible, and I hope it's been of interest to you. Thank you.